I've had a lot of people asking me about this recently, and to be honest, I'm probably going to have to create an updated video on this topic depending on how things shake out to finish out the season and what transpires in the offseason. But the question centers around Nikola Vucevic and how the Bulls should be approaching his contract situation this offseason, especially now that the trade deadline has officially passed and he wasn't moved, which, let me be clear, he was never going to be getting traded. I don't know why so many fans were so sure that he would, but in any event, Vucevic is going to remain with the Bulls for the rest of the season. But beyond that, what does the future hold for Vucevic and his tenure with the Chicago Bulls, and how his performance to finish out the rest of the season could have an impact on how that transpires? And that's what I want to talk about in this video. Also, guys, I do this periodically because I don't want to be one of those YouTubers who does it for every video, but if you like the content and have been watching it for a while and you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, as about 48% of you tuning into the channel are not subscribed, and it would mean a great deal to me. But anyway, with that being said, let's get into the content. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bull Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I'm sure most of you know, but Vucevic is currently in the third year of his 4-year contract that he initially signed with the Orlando Magic before being traded to the Bulls last season at the deadline. So going into next season, Vucevic will be on an expiring contract at $22 million for the final year of his deal, which is actually a pretty friendly contract given Vucevic's production, assuming he can maintain his current level of play that we have been seeing most recently. And of course, trading a player on an expiring deal is generally an easier trade to make than trying to move a player who has a lot of money guaranteed left on their deal. This isn't me saying that the Bulls should trade Vucevic, just explaining those are generally contracts that are easier to move and a factor to keep in mind when going into the offseason. Now, one of the things you do have to consider with the Bulls, among many factors really, is Zach LaVine's contract. That'll be expiring at the end of the season. You have to factor in the salary cap space you'll need to presumably give him a max contract, and whether you want to offer an extension to Vucevic this offseason, who will be extension eligible should you want to extend him early to be able to lock him in rather than trying to wait for his contract to expire and then sign him next offseason for potentially a lower amount or even a higher amount, I guess, depending on how he plays. Or you run the risk of having him walk for nothing if another team offers him an attractive enough of a contract that the Bulls are either unwilling to match or simply they just don't have the cap space to match it even if they wanted to. Now, of course, all of this depends on how Vucevic performs and how the Bulls do as a team in the playoffs, and of course Vucevic's impact to their playoff performance. But let's talk about Vucevic's season thus far and assess how much Vuce is potentially worth when considering an extension. Now, Vuce has had a bit of an up and down year. Really, at the start of this season, he was pretty underwhelming, underperforming relative to his expectations and what we traded for in order to get him. He was inconsistent in his play, he wasn't shooting well, wasn't playing aggressive, and at times he was even a bit of a liability for the Bulls in that first month of the season. Vuce then would have moments of great games, but then would revert back to his old ways and getting worked by other centers in the league, and you had a lot of Bulls fans up in arms saying that he needs to be traded, and that we lost the trade to the Magic because of how well Wendell Carter Jr. was playing, and of course Franz Wagner, who the Magic used to select with the Bulls lottery pick that they sent in that Vucevic trade. Again, I think those types of reactions are overblown and very prisoner of the moment-esque, but more recently, ever since the Bulls started experiencing all the injuries and really needing Vucevic to step up more on the offensive end, Vuce has upped his game considerably to the point where in Vuce's last 9 games before going into the All-Star break, he was averaging 25.3 points per game, 13.6 rebounds, 4.1 assists, and doing so on 59% shooting from the field. I don't know about you, but those are all-star type numbers and what we're used to seeing from a guy like Vucevic based on what we saw last season. Granted, it's a smaller sample size, it's only 9 games, but honestly, it's more than just those 9 games. It's also the change in Vucevic's aggression in the post, his quickness in getting to the basket, and his overall level of confidence for which he is playing now that is very encouraging as we go into closing out the season. I said in some videos at the start of the season that Vucevic's slump wasn't as concerning to me in terms of his overall numbers. It was more so his general confidence in the way that he was carrying himself during those moments, like he was timid and second-guessing himself to the point where it was really impacting the Bulls as a team. So to see him gain that confidence back and also focusing on his inside play rather than just his outside shooting, which he's still really struggled with, has been a big help in bringing Vucevic's production back up. Currently, Vuce is averaging 18.2 points per game on 47% shooting, 11.7 rebounds, 3.6 assists, as well as a career high in blocks at 1.2 blocks per game and 1 steal a game. That's what he's doing for the season. Like, these are very solid numbers for someone who started off the season very slowly. Now, I think the main question is, what is Vucevic's trade value going to be going into the offseason? Again, I'm not suggesting that the Bulls should trade him, but rather for assessing what a contract like his would be worth versus a potential trade. Because look, the last thing you want to do if you're the Bulls is to have Vucevic walk in free agency next offseason for nothing. Like, you traded 2 first-round picks and Wendell Carter Jr. for him. To do that, to just have him be there for a year and a half with the franchise, that would be a mistake. You either extend him because you have his bird rights, or if you perceive that Vucevic isn't going to be part of the team's plan beyond next season, you try and get some value for him in return in the form of a trade, whether that be during this offseason or at the trade deadline next year. Now, for me personally, I wouldn't advocate for a trade unless Vucevic has expressed he's not happy or doesn't intend to re-sign with the Bulls when his contract expires, or unless you can get a considerable package in return to where you're getting more than what he's worth from a team who is in desperate need of a big man. And the reason I wouldn't advocate for a trade, well, one, Vucevic is still a really good player despite the fact that his numbers have dropped this season. Like, he's still the Bulls' 3rd best player, a great scorer, an elite rebounder, and has even been playing decent defense this year. But more importantly, and this is really dependent on how the Bulls do in the playoffs, but you don't want to mess with the team chemistry that they've been able to develop and establish with this group of guys that they have. Like, it's no wonder AK was very firm on his statements for why they didn't make any moves at the deadline, and a lot of that was because of the team chemistry and how happy they are with this group of guys that they have. And look, there is a lot to be said about disrupting that chemistry, even when it may seem like going after a certain player may be an upgrade on paper, but it doesn't translate into winning on the court. Take James Harden as an example for the Nets, or Westbrook being traded to the Lakers. Team chemistry and managing player egos by working together as a collective unit outweighs pure talent. Now, what I do think will be the most likely outcome as it relates to Vucevic's contract is whether he'll be extended or not. I mean, I really doubt that the Bulls are going to offer him an extension this offseason, even though he'll be extension eligible. It doesn't mean that I don't think they believe in Vucevic or that they're going to try to trade him. They're not going to trade him. If I hear one more time that the Bulls are going to trade Vucevic, I'm going to lose it. But if they choose not to extend him this offseason, I wouldn't really read into it a ton, because keep in mind, the Bulls didn't extend Zach Lavine this past offseason, and they had the ability to do so. But ultimately, the front office and Lavine's agent weren't able to agree upon an extension because they both knew that if waiting until his contract expires, that would be beneficial to both parties and that Zach could get more money next offseason by signing a 5-year max extension rather than a 4-year, and potentially a super max deal if he makes an All-NBA team. But it was also beneficial to the Bulls in that it enabled them more cap flexibility this past offseason to sign other free agents, which they of course did by bringing in guys like Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Alex Caruso, which positioned the Bulls better for winning and offering Lavine an opportunity for himself to get more money. So Vucevic's situation, it's a little bit different in the sense that, unlike Lavine, he isn't in his prime, and you have to be thinking about his long-term health and how many more good years is he going to have left in him. That being said, Vucevic is a pretty durable player and comes from a family with a history of longevity. His dad played professional basketball overseas until he was in his 40s. But for Vucevic and the Bulls, it's more of a matter of, given his age and the fact that he'll be 32 next season, you wait and see how he does next season. Does his performance still warrant a big contract or an extension period? It gives you more flexibility to work with this offseason in the Bulls cap space by extending Lavine, potentially even offering an extension to Kobe White, who will also be extension eligible as well, or even look to add other role players to the team who are going to be free agents. And then the following offseason, you have a better understanding of where this team is at and how you should be structuring Vucevic's contract for the team going forward. Or again, you decide not to extend him, let his contract expire, and free up the cap space, or look to get some assets in return for him in the form of a trade, or even a sign and trade as the Bulls did with Lauri Markkanen this past offseason. Again, it's really too early to speculate what the Bulls are going to do with Vucevic's contract. It's dependent on so many factors, like how the Bulls close out the season, what other free agent opportunities are going to prevent themselves this offseason, whether Zach Lavine remains with the Bulls, because keep in mind, Zach could decide to leave himself. Like, it's not just a matter of whether the Bulls choose to extend him. Zach has the ability to walk away and go to another team. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's something to remember. And of course, it's dependent on what the league salary cap will look like going into next offseason versus what it's projected to be this offseason. And also, obviously, injuries to certain players. So as I mentioned, I'll likely have to make an updated video on this topic sometime in the offseason because certain factors will change this perspective by then. But I know people have been asking about this, wanting to understand the details of how Vucevic's contract could impact the Bulls offseason. And given it's the All-Star break, I figured I would share my thoughts on the matter, but don't just take my word for it. I want to hear what you guys think. What is your perspective on the matter? What do you think the Bulls will do with Vucevic's contract? Let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget that tomorrow is Hot Takes Wednesday, so be sure to leave your hot takes in the comments below to be included in tomorrow's video. Until then, guys, as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.